I went to see the second film in the Star Wars sequel trilogy last year with no expectations. And there is a lot to talk about, and everyone is giving their opinion. I was going to make a video on Rey Sue. However, while sitting in the cinema, my brain was overclocking itself, trying to figure out how anyone could write so many nonsensical military aspects into a film. Nothing made sense, and everyone seemed as competent at war as I am at writing romance. So let's begin this video where it would be most apt. The beginning. The film opens with the iconic title crawl, and we immediately bump into issues. The credits say that the New Republic has fallen, and the Resistance is about to be destroyed by the New Order fleet which is approaching the now discovered Resistance base. Now, if you were like me, you were wondering as far back as Force Awakens about the difference between the New Republic and the Resistance. In fact, you were also probably wondering how the First Order came into existence. In The Last Jedi, you won't get any answers to these queries. So I went to Wikipedia to see if I could find anything out. If the sources are accurate, then this is what happened. After the Death Star was destroyed, the Rebel Alliance and the Empire had one final battle, the Battle of Jakku. In this battle, the Rebels won, but at heavy cost, and the Empire was badly mauled. A treaty was signed after the battle, the Galactic Concordance, in which the Empire agreed to dissolve and disarm. Not completely, however. The Imperial Remnant was allowed to retain control of the core and the inner rim of the galaxy, with a demilitarized zone between Imperial space and New Republic space. It stopped training stormtroopers and shut down Imperial academies, and the ships it still possessed stayed inside the inner rim and the core, eyeing the New Republic fleets cautiously. Some Imperials did not agree to abide by the terms of the Galactic Concordance and fled into the unknown regions, where Snoke found them and reformed them into the First Order. The New Republic basically ignored whatever the First Order did. But former rebels and Republic leaders such as Princess Leia thought they were a threat, and finding the Senate and the Chancellor unwilling to prepare for war, decided to set up their own private military, called the Resistance. The New Republic did not condone nor condemn the Resistance, although some politicians secretly supported it. The New Republic government was of course destroyed by Starkiller Base and one of its main fleets with it. So that is the canon distinction between the New Republic and the Resistance. This is where the questions start. 1. Where are the rest of the Republic fleets? 2. Why haven't the Resistance and the New Republic joined together already? Only one Republic fleet was destroyed by Starkiller Base, and Wikipedia says that the other fleets were around other planets. So where are they in the film? Why haven't the Resistance and the Republic fleets joined together to fight the First Order? Since the entire leadership of the New Republic is dead, wouldn't all of the remaining star systems and military forces make Leia their temporary war leader? If the Republic is actually finished, as in all the remaining star systems have either surrendered or are busy negotiating peace terms with the First Order, why didn't the text just say something akin to, "The New Republic has fallen, all remaining star systems have surrendered to the First Order led by Supreme Leader Snoke. Now the only resistance to the First Order is the Resistance." Something like this would make it clear that the Republic has officially surrendered, and is no longer fighting the First Order. Looking at the text as it stands, it just looks like the Republic military is in a state of apathy, and can't be bothered to fight the First Order. Essentially, it isn't clear why the remaining Republic fleets and planets aren't fighting back. And I think that they would fight back after the First Order obliterated an entire star system. Fear isn't an adequate explanation for Republic inaction, in my view, because Starkiller Base was destroyed by just a couple of fighters and bombers, proving that the First Order is weak in many ways, and certainly not invincible. But anyway, the title credits finish, and we see a First Order fleet appear out of space next to the planet Dakar. General Weasley says that the Resistance base is on Dakar, and orders the Dreadnought of the fleet to commence an orbital bombardment. Looking at the First Order fleet when it first comes out of hyperspace, and commences operations against the planet, anyone can tell that they don't know what they are doing. They are attacking a Resistance base, the same one in which a small fleet of fighters and bombers were docked. The very same fighters and bombers which successfully destroyed Starkiller Base. Why hasn't General Hux ordered the immediate deployment of fighter screens? He would know that they have fighters, some very skilled ones at that, and that they would likely try to attack his fleet, rather than roll over and take his orbital bombardment. Moreover, why are the Star Destroyers not doing anything? The Dreadnought is charging its weapons to blow up the base, but why are the Star Destroyers just sitting there? They know where the base is. Why aren't they surrounding it in orbit, so they can destroy any Resistance ships that might try to escape? Then Poe flies up to the Dreadnought from Dakar. For some reason, nobody immediately opens fire on him. He then contacts the First Order flagship and asks to speak to General Hux to ask him about the terms of surrender. Hux says he will only accept an unconditional surrender. Not in those words, however. But Poe isn't paying attention and starts mocking him. Now ask yourself, if you were a professional general who had spent years training in the art of war, and an enemy claiming to want to speak to you about surrender started mocking you over the radio, do you think you would either A. open fire on him, rather than waste your time taking part in a clear distraction, or B. shout angrily, "I am the general"? Now guess which course of action our good general chose. Why did he waste any precious time talking to an enemy pilot in what was clearly a distraction? Because Hux did this, Poe was able to charge up his engines and fly straight to the top of the Dreadnought and start destroying its defensive turrets. Poe destroys them very easily, making me question what the point is in having shields if they are unable to stop the blasts from a single fighter destroying them. I'm going to assume that Poe's X-Wing has been upgraded with more powerful guns than the other fighters, and because he is flying so close to the turrets, the shields have been rendered ineffective. But make a note that his fighter's abilities to tear through the shields and destroy the turrets so easily isn't explained in the film. Poe is hit once during this operation, and his blasters are damaged, and he asks BB-8 to fix the circuitry controlling the weapons on his X-Wing. Now, does BB-8 actually try to fix the circuits? No. Instead, he slams his head into the circuitry. Somehow this works and Poe manages to destroy the last turret. But this raises two big questions. Why did he take a droid who is unable to fix his fighter when it is damaged? The reason everyone took R2 and R4 in their fighters throughout the saga was because they were able to fix the fighters when they were damaged. Such in A New Hope, when Luke's X-Wing is shot and R2 has to fix an engine part. Why would an ace pilot such as Poe take a droid who is so useless at fixing things? A droid like R2 would have tried to fix the circuits at least. The second question is, why can't BB-8 fix the circuitry? Throughout the film he does many impressive things, such as beating up 3 prison wardens and driving a chicken walker. Considering he can do these things, and the fact that Poe uses him as his fighter droid, why can't BB-8 fix the circuitry? It just doesn't make sense. But anyway, Princess Poppins tells Poe to retreat and forget about taking out the Dreadnought. Poe, being a flying ace, refuses to listen to the armchair general and turns off communications with her, and destroys the last turret before calling in the bombers. The bombers arrive, and they are very big. Like seriously, what happened to the Y-Wings? Were they all destroyed in Force Awakens? Anyway, these large bombers fly above the Dreadnought and begin to drop their payloads. Now, as far as I am aware, this would actually work, because the momentum gathered by the bombs falling in the artificial gravity of the ship would continue in zero gravity, allowing them to fall on top of the Dreadnought. However, don't quote me on this, as I am not a physicist. So although dropping bombs seems strange in this universe, I don't have a particular problem with it. Although I still want to know why they didn't use missiles or torpedoes, as they would have been more effective and less risky. However, the fact that the bombers are flying so close to the Dreadnought is just dumb. Even if the TIE fighters hadn't destroyed them, the explosions from their own bombs would have done it. Why are they flying so close? Do they actually want to die? Anyhow, the TIE fighters are finally out, and are crushing the Resistance bombers and fighters. Meanwhile, the main Resistance fleet is sitting there, waiting for Poe's attack to destroy the Dreadnought. So what are Hux and his other Star Destroyers doing in this engagement? Nothing, apparently. Despite the fact the Resistance fleet is just sitting there, he does not move his Star Destroyers closer or try to attack them. "But your Imperial Majesty," I hear you cry, "he is waiting for the Dreadnought to destroy the fleet with its massive cannons. Why waste fuel and ammunition when you can save resources by letting the Dreadnought take it out in one shot?" That does make sense, but that explanation raises another question. Why aren't the Star Destroyers helping the TIE fighters destroy the bombers? Seriously. Those bombers are bigger than B-17 flying fortresses, and they are flying above the Dreadnought. They are also moving very slowly, much slower than a B-17 flying fortress. So if you carefully aimed your cannons, you would be able to destroy them without hitting the Dreadnought. Why is Hux just sitting on his hands doing nothing throughout the course of this battle? Is he still having a paddy about Poe not believing he was the general and commander of the fleet? Because if so, that is really immature. Despite some serious attempts by the TIE fighters to destroy the bombers before they drop their payloads, one manages to drop theirs and destroys the Dreadnought. Poe and the remaining fighters then fly back to the Resistance fleet and jump into hyperspace away from the First Order fleet. Golem Palpatine somehow knows the mission was a failure, maybe the Force told him, and contacts General Hux on the bridge. He tosses him like a rag doll for his failure at basic space fleet tactics, and yet does not demote or kill him, despite the fact that the fleet would clearly be better led by another officer. Also, serious question, why are the First Order fleets being commanded by a general rather than an admiral? Wouldn't Hux be better commanding ground forces? Actually, this might explain why he is so terrible at space fleet tactics. But I thought Snoke was supposed to be an intelligent leader. That is how he is portrayed after all. So why did he place Hux in charge of the First Order fleets? This doesn't make sense. Now Hux manages to convince Snoke that he has a plan B, and off-screen tells him about the hyperspace tracker, which for some reason was never used by the First Order in Force Awakens to track the Millennium Falcon, but whatever, maybe it hadn't been developed until The Last Jedi. Snoke is impressed and doesn't demote or relieve him of his command, even though both of these would be a good idea, and the battle scene ends. The next scene begins with Leia slapping Poe in the face. She claims he was reckless, and that the attack cost many pilots their lives, and it was his fault. She then demotes him from commander to captain with immediate effect. However, this decision is wrong from about every perspective. Firstly, Poe was not to blame for the attack going ahead. Yes, he may have turned off his radio, and refused to listen to Leia, and he may have even been the one who called in the bombers and the rest of the fighters. But none of the other pilots had turned off their radios, so if Leia didn't want them to attack and wanted them to retreat, why didn't she contact them and tell them to ignore Poe's order and come back to the main fleet? It seems to me she just didn't want to take responsibility for the attack, because she thought too many people had died. Insert joke about women only accepting responsibility when it suits them. Secondly, it was a very good trade. For less than 100 pilots dead and a dozen spacecraft lost, the Resistance destroyed a Dreadnought, a ship that must have cost the First Order hundreds of millions of credits, and which was apparently crewed by over 200,000 people. So, the amount of money, hardware and men the First Order lost when that Dreadnought was destroyed must have been really high. This was a great victory and a brilliant trade-off, and Poe was right when he said that they might not get another chance to destroy the Dreadnought. After all, Hux might be incompetent, but he is probably at the least capable of learning from his mistakes. I cannot see why someone would be so upset with that brilliant outcome. Seriously, it is far easier to replace some bombers and fighters than it is to replace a Dreadnought of that size. This was not only a tactical victory, but also a strategic one. Why is Leia so upset? Now, the small Resistance fleet is travelling through hyperspace, and I have to admit I was very surprised to see how small the Resistance actually was. I thought Force Awakens suggested that the Resistance was bigger. They come out of hyperspace and realise that the First Order has been tracking them. The First Order ships form a semicircle in front of the fleet, and are really quite close to them. Now, the First Order fleet does not do either A. Open fire with their cannons, or B. Attack them with swarms of fighters. Instead, they fire a couple of blasts, and then send Kylo Ren and 2 other TIE fighters to attack the fleet. As a result of this, the majority of the fleet manages to move out of the maximal effective range of the First Order's main guns. Now, why didn't the First Order open fire with all guns at the fleet? That would have been the most effective means of quickly and decisively destroying the Resistance fleet. Why did they just fire a few shots and send a couple of fighters? If they didn't want to use their main guns, why didn't they just attack with hundreds of TIE fighters and bombers? Why oh why is the First Order so incompetent? Anyway, the remnants of the Resistance fleet fly some distance away from the First Order, and Hux is informed that because of the distance they have to travel, the blasts of the Star Destroyers and Snoke's main ship don't have enough power to get through the shields of Resistance ships, particularly the main cruiser. And the engines of the First Order ships are not powerful enough to keep up. So Hux orders the fleet to continue the pursuit and says that they will wait for the Resistance fleet to run out of fuel so that they can destroy them when they get closer. But this is absurd. Why didn't Hux just order the fleet to jump into hyperspace again and jump the distance between them? It seems that although the First Order does not lack fuel, it does lack imagination. But the Resistance are not happy with the First Order getting all the incompetent points, and also decide to be stupid. During the initial encounter between the two fleets, Kylo Ren supporting TIE fighters blow up the main command deck of the lead cruiser, called the Rosas, killing all of the senior Resistance commanders, including, to my utmost dismay and sadness, Admiral Akbar, one of the greatest admirals in the Star Wars universe. Now, Leia doesn't die because she does a Mary Poppins and flies through space back onto the ship, and selfishly decides not to save anyone else, like Admiral Akbar, for instance. However, she quickly falls unconscious and is taken to the medical bay, incapacitated. Because she can't lead and the rest of the good commanders are dead, she is replaced by Vice Admiral Amlin Holdo. My first thoughts on seeing her were, why does she have pink hair, and what is that outfit? Be honest, does that look anything like a military uniform of any description in the Star Wars universe? At best, I'd assume that dress to be something a female politician would wear, not a female vice admiral. Leia's outfit is far better. Her clothes are made of a rougher, coarser, tougher looking material for one, and her cloak thing is great. It looks like something a princess general might actually wear in a sci-fi universe. This dress appears to be made of a spandex type material, and it looks nothing like the uniform of a vice admiral. If I were a soldier, I wouldn't look at her and think that she was my superior officer. And don't say it's supposed to make her look pretty or something, because it almost certainly fails at that role. The dress emphasises her neck and makes her look like a giraffe, does everything it can to make her chest look flat, and does not wrap itself around her waist or hips at all. What is the point of this dress? If they didn't want people looking at her neck or her chest, why didn't they give her a shoulder cape, like the one Michael Caine wears in Zulu? Or heck, like the one Captain Phasma wears in this film? The person responsible for her costume should reconsider his career. After she gives a terrible speech where she pontificates on the abstract notion of hope rather than provide any, Poe asks her what the plan is. Rather than tell him what the plan is, or tell him she has a plan and will tell him when the time is right, she shows complete disrespect by calling him reckless and then gloats over his demotion. Why would a commander do this to Poe? Poe may have been demoted, but he is still a captain, and considering how many of the officers are dead, he is basically the second in command now. Why doesn't she tell him her plan? This is the man who destroyed Starkiller Base. If anyone should be informed about what is going on, it should be him. But Pinky doesn't tell him anything, and effectively tells him to get lost, making it look like she doesn't have a plan. Because of this, Poe becomes desperate, and has to agree to a very risk-wrought plan made by Finn and Rose. The incompetence of this Vice Admiral is bizarre. There was literally no reason not to tell him the plan, and every reason to do so, one of those reasons being so that he wouldn't agree to stupid plans made by Finn and Rose. Anyway, Finn and Rose's plan is to find a hacker who can hack through the shields of the First Order main ship, the Supremacy, get on board, and then disable the hyperspace tracker so they can safely jump to hyperspace. The execution of this plan further exposes the incompetence of the Resistance. Finn and Rose take a transport ship, and fly out of the cruiser and jump into hyperspace to the planet where the hacker is residing. Now, the First Order does not A. detect the ship leaving, for some reason, and B. doesn't track or follow the ship. If the First Order can't detect this transport leaving the fleet, why doesn't the Resistance just escape in transports? They could send one transport every 10 minutes, and to different locations, so it wouldn't even matter if the First Order was tracking every single one, because they wouldn't have the Star Destroyers to send after them. In fact, why didn't Pinky order the fleet to scatter immediately? The First Order seems to be most concerned with destroying the main Resistance cruiser, the Radis, because it is the flagship of the Resistance fleet. Why not order the frigates and corvettes to a different location? Or several different locations, in case the First Order do try tracking and following them? Why are they still flying in one direction, waiting for their fuel to run out and the First Order to pick them off one by one? Now, Pinky does actually have a plan, and the way she describes it to the crew at the last minute makes it sound worse than it actually is. She tells the crew to prepare the shuttles to fly to the nearby planet of Crate. Poe points out that the shuttles have no shields or weapons, so they would be like lambs to the slaughter. Now, it is mentioned later in the film that the shuttles have cloaking defences, so they won't be detected by the First Order sensors. However, rather than tell Poe that the shuttles have cloaking shields, so the First Order won't be able to detect them, she stands there and tells him to get out of the command room. So Poe, and everyone else apparently, believes that Pinky is sending them to their deaths. So Poe leads a mutiny, and waits by the hyperdrive interface for Finn, Rose, and the hacker DJ to disable the hyperspace tracker so that they can safely jump to lightspeed. The plan fails because DJ betrays Finn and Rose, and Poe is stunned by Leia, who wakes up, somehow knows the details of Pinky's plan, and has decided that Poe is out of line. So Pinky's plan goes ahead, and the shuttles set out of the cruiser to the planet Crate. DJ then tells the First Order about the cloaking measures. Now, this is maybe the first time the cloaks are mentioned in the film, the second time being when Leia finally explains the plan properly to Poe on one of the shuttles. So how did DJ discover the cloaks? He didn't know what Pinky's plan was. The only people he was in contact with were Finn, Rose, and Poe, and none of them knew about the cloaks. If they did, they wouldn't have tried deactivating the tracker on Snoke's ship. So how did DJ find out about this? This is a plot hole of incredible magnitude. Anyway, the First Order starts obliterating the Resistance shuttles, and Pinky decides, after watching about half of them get destroyed, to turn the ship around and ram into Snoke's ship at FTL speeds. This splits Snoke's grand ship into two. Now, I wouldn't have a problem with this. The tactic seems sensible, effective, and perfectly reasonable from a scientific and military perspective. But, now that we have established that FTL can be weaponized, why hasn't it been weaponized prior to this film? Why hasn't anyone built projectiles that travel at FTL speeds if they can bypass shields? Heck, why even bother building the Death Star or Starkiller base? Why not just send large ships flying at FTL speeds into planets to destroy them? This single incident really opens Pandora's box on the lethal abilities of FTL speeds in the Star Wars universe. After this happens, the remaining Resistance shuttles land on Crate, which turns out to be a Salt version of Hoth. Because the First Order know that the Resistance are on Salt Hoth, they land AT-M6s, Guerrilla ATs, on the planet and prepare a massive cannon to blast through the huge door of the Resistance base. Why they couldn't use one of their remaining Star Destroyers to fire at it, I'm not sure. Maybe Starship cannons are not accurate enough. Anyway, Poe decides to lead a suicide charge in ski speeders to destroy the cannon. This isn't a great or imaginative tactic, but at this point there really is no other option but to charge the cannon. If the cannon were to fire after all, the Resistance would be defenceless, and liable to be crushed once and for all. The First Order send TIE fighters to attack from above, while the Guerrilla ATs also open fire at the rust buckets heading towards them. The ultimate rust bucket, the Millennium Falcon, shows up, and starts to provide air cover for the other rust buckets. So Kylo orders all the TIE fighters to attack the Falcon, and to leave the ski speeders charged to the ATs. Now, is it a bad idea to send all your fighters to chase one ship, when you have enough to spare to attack forces on the ground assaulting you? I will let the viewer decide on that one. Despite the pressure on the charge being much reduced because of the absence of the TIE fighters, Poe decides to order a retreat, because he believes the losses won't be worth the victory. This is supposed to be Poe developing into a better character, because of Leia dressing him down about not being reckless or hot-headed. But the problem, as I've mentioned before, is Poe made the right call when he ordered an attack on the Dreadnought, so there is no reason for him to change as a character, and in this case a suicide charge is the only valid option, because if the cannon fires, the Resistance will be finished. Finn wisely decides to ignore Poe's order, and intends to crash into the cannon, destroying it and saving the Resistance base. Finn gets really close to the cannon just as it starts to fire, but before Finn can destroy it and die a hero, Rose flies out of nowhere and crashes into him. Like seriously, how did she get there? Didn't she start retreating immediately when Poe ordered a retreat, pushing his ship out of the way of the firing cannon? Now she did this to save him, but quite frankly, it's amazing she didn't kill him and herself. What if she had killed him when she crashed into his speeder? His death would have been pointless, and she might as well have left him to die in the way he chose. Anyway, Finn, rather confused, asks her why she did this. And Rose says something akin to, "You win wars by protecting those you love, not destroying those you hate." Firstly, this is stupid. You can win wars by destroying things you hate, and by being really evil. Case in point, the Galactic Empire in the Star Wars universe. But secondly, and most importantly, Finn was protecting the people he loved. He was protecting the Resistance, and sacrificing himself, so his friends, such as Poe, Rose, and Rey, wouldn't have to. He was protecting the people he loved. By Rose's own logic, he wasn't doing anything wrong. Things now look very bleak because the First Order has made a massive hole in the gate of the Resistance base, thanks to Rose. All looks lost because nobody is responding to the Resistance's distress calls. Then suddenly, Luke's projection comes into the battle. Now, Luke is a force projection, so he cannot actually stop the First Order from attacking the base. So the only thing he can do is stall the First Order and buy the Resistance time to retreat. But rather than tell Leia, or anyone else for that matter, that he wants them to run away while he stalls Kylo, he instead leaves them to figure it out. What would have happened if everyone thought he was going to defeat the First Order army? They would have all died, because when Luke finally stopped projecting, there would be nothing in the way of Kylo and his army, and they would have crushed the Resistance there and then. Why did Luke allow that possibility to exist? He should have told Leia he wanted them to run, rather than let Poe figure it out. What if Poe wasn't intelligent? Why are the Resistance so bad at communicating with each other? None of the commanders seem to want to share their plans with anyone. Why is that? The film ends shortly after, with the Resistance finding a way to escape, and the First Order realising they will have to fight the Resistance another day. I hope my analysis has made it clear that the commanders of the First Order and the Resistance are incompetent, and that Rian Johnson needed a military advisor or a really nerdy Star Wars fan to help him touch up the battle scenes. Now, you might be wondering why one should care so much about whether the battle scenes have sound tactics and strategies. There's a simple reason. The smarter, stronger, and more competent your villains are, the more heroic and daring your heroes will be, and the more the audience will like them. If you have a great, powerful villain who is smart, very clever, and seemingly invincible, not only do you have bags of tension because your audience will be sitting there trying to figure out how the heroes will defeat him, but you will also have a great payoff. People like it when a seemingly invincible person is knocked down a peg or two. It is really satisfying to watch, especially when it is the heroes doing it to the villain. It makes your heroes more impressive characters. The fact that your heroes were able to defeat such a powerful villain makes them even more heroic and more admirable. Think back to The Empire Strikes Back, when the Millennium Falcon was being chased by a Star Destroyer, commanded by a certain Captain Needa, and how Han Solo managed to hide the ship from his sensors. Did Captain Needa do anything wrong? No. You could argue that he should have sent fighters after the Falcon, but let's be honest. Did he need to? The Falcon couldn't fly away. Its hyperdrive had been damaged, and he was firing at it with all cannons. If he had scored one more hit on the Falcon, it would have been destroyed. Captain Needa was doing the right thing. If he had sent out fighters, he could have lost men, so his tactic was a sound one, and it almost worked. The only reason the Falcon got away was because it didn't occur to him that it might be hiding under his ship's sensors. It didn't occur to Vader even, or anybody else for that matter. He was confused by the Falcon's sudden disappearance, and was wondering whether it had a cloaking device. Captain Needa seemed to be a professional commander, trained to command his ship in a battle fleet situation, and simply unprepared for guerrilla and space smuggler tactics. The impression I get is that none of the Imperial officers in the original trilogy were trained to deal with the unorthodox strategies of the rebellion, while the rebels were aware of the Imperial strategies. Because Captain Needa is portrayed as a professional officer and competent commander, you almost feel like clapping for Han Solo when you discover how he got out of what seemed like a hopeless situation. Because of his clever escape, Han Solo is further imprinted in the mind of the viewer as an intelligent and brilliant pilot. Or consider Grand Moff Tarkin from A New Hope. His cold, calculating, and professional demeanour tells the audience that he is a man of intelligence and patience. If he happened to be commanding an opposing fleet, you wouldn't want to bump into it. Grand Moff Tarkin only ever put one foot wrong in A New Hope, and that was listening to Darth Vader's advice on tracking the Millennium Falcon to the Rebel base, rather than destroying it. But this was only a mistake in hindsight. It was just a calculated risk on Tarkin's part, and he even says, "I'm taking an awful risk, Vader. This better work." And it almost did. The Death Star was seconds away from blowing up the Rebel base's planet, and it was only destroyed because Luke used the Force to fire his torpedoes at the right moment. The reason the Death Star battle is so tense is because Grand Moff Tarkin is a good commander, and every second is inching closer and closer to victory. So when Luke manages to destroy the Death Star, it really does feel triumphant. Now think of the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. Yes, the Emperor was very cocky, and perhaps overconfident when he set up the trap for the Rebel fleet, despite the Death Star not being fully complete. But you have to hand it to him. His plan almost worked. Besides, how was he supposed to predict the Ewoks? You can call the Imperial Starfleet in the original trilogy a lot of things, but incompetence isn't one of them. The fact that the Imperial fleet is so big and so competent in the original trilogy is exactly what makes it intimidating. The audience knows that the Empire is something to fear because the villains are dangerous, they are powerful, and they know what they are doing. This creates great tension-filled scenes throughout the trilogy, and our heroes really get tested. And whenever our heroes come out on top, it feels earned and it feels good. Victory is sweet in the original trilogy. By contrast, victory in The Last Jedi is cheap and tastes bitter. In The Last Jedi, our heroes are strong. Some might say a few are even too strong. So they deserve a challenge. We want to see them grow, and we want to see them achieve great and spectacular victories over the First Order. But because the First Order is filled with idiot commanders, we never get to see any clever victories, because the Resistance aren't forced to think of clever or daring solutions. They just have to be less stupid than their enemy, and this is not interesting to watch in the slightest. The boundless incompetence in the film also takes away any credibility the First Order has as an antagonistic and villainous force. How is anyone supposed to view the First Order as a threat when they fail at basic tactics and strategies? Watching The Last Jedi, I can honestly say I never felt things get tense once, because I could tell the First Order was filled with incompetence, and nothing could convince me that the Resistance was in any danger. In fact, I felt angry at the Resistance for not exploiting the boundless stupidity of the First Order. What's worse now is that the only threatening person in the First Order, Supreme Leader Snoke, is dead, and has been replaced by Kylo Ren, perhaps the least intimidating person in the First Order. Heck, even General Hux is a more daunting character than him. To round this up, the battle scenes in this film were terrible. Nobody in the film knew tactics or strategy, except maybe Poe Dameron, and the incompetence of the First Order makes them laughable and unintimidating villains. One last thing before I leave this video. DJ mentions to Finn that one of the arms dealers on the casino planet has been selling to both the Resistance and the First Order. He shows holograms of both an X-Wing and a TIE Fighter as he says this. This raises a question. Why are the First Order and the Resistance still using such old equipment? There has been a gap of something like 30 years since Return of the Jedi and The Last Jedi. Why has no one updated the equipment? Yes, the Star Destroyers are an updated design, and there are some new versions, such as the Dreadnought, and some updated A-Wing models and a new TIE Fighter type, but the X-Wings and the TIE Fighters seem exactly the same. The new TIE Fighters just have a different coat of paint. Some arms dealers must be making a killing, scamming the First Order and the Resistance by selling them old tech with new paint jobs.